I think it's safe to assume, simply on the art style and music alone, this game draws heavy inspiration from the cult hit Hollow Knight. But calling Unbound a Hollow Knight clone might be a little too rash. Unbound Worlds Apart is another solid title to add to the plethora of indie games released this year. Unbound is a puzzle platformer with Metroidvania elements, emphasis on the elements, because despite the variety and expansive worlds available in this game, the player is on a pretty linear path with the odd hidden passage here and there, and very little backtracking. Unbound instead chooses to focus on platforming, using the ability to swap dimensions on the fly. This is by no means an original idea. In fact, it was part of the recent PlayStation classic Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. However, unlike Rift Apart, this game doesn't really connect two playable spaces, but instead creates a portal in a set location or around the player, depending on the world. Some portals slow time, turn you into stone, or turn obstacles into tools for platforming on. These are just some of the plentiful tools available to you in this game. Unbound's dedication to platforming and puzzles makes this a challenging yet rewarding experience that does a fantastic job at getting the player to think outside of the box. You play as the young mage Sully, who is one of the many sages who link and protect worlds from corruption. That is, until one day, when the world in which the mages reside in is threatened by the corruption itself. It becomes Sully's duty to save not only his world, but all worlds from this corruption, using his portal-like abilities to connect worlds and laws that bind them. Sully must use the portals to overcome many difficulties and save his fellow mages along the way. Unlike the extremely popular Hollow Knight, this story isn't quite as rich or cram-packed full with lore at every turn. But everything within the game still feels like it belongs. The creatures, enemies, and world itself all look like they belong in this freakish-looking hellscape. The story of Unbound is primarily there to explain the gameplay mechanics. It creates a reason for the portals, the obstacles and enemies provide context and foundation to the gameplay. If you are hoping for a rich story narrative like Hollow Knight, Unbound isn't the game. But by no means does that mean the story is bad. It's a solid story, but it's nothing special either. It just gets the job done, and that's all you can ask for. As mentioned before, a huge part of the puzzles and platforming in this game is down to Sully's ability to open portals to other worlds. Applying that world's laws of existence, from reversing gravity or revealing hidden pathways to more bizarre and unrefined, like turning yourself into a boulder or shrinking your size. These portals become an integral part of your ability to progress the story and are used in just about every puzzle. However, you don't have access to all these powers at once, but instead must connect to the dimensions through gates before then being able to use a portal to that dimension. Essentially meaning that the player can connect to only one world at a time. You might think that such a decision would restrict the puzzle's possibilities and ultimately restrict the gameplay. But I'd argue it helps the puzzles become more refined. You get a greater understanding of how each world's portals can be used to benefit your progression. You become familiar with what each of these worlds can do, rather than simply overloading the player with a plethora of different choices to the point where they forget crucial elements of Portal's abilities. Take the portal that turns you into a boulder. Not only does it transform you into a boulder itself, but it also slows down time for enemies within the portal, creating a potential window for you to sneak past. I doubt I would have found out that was a part of the world's lore if I hadn't been restricted to it. Unbound does a fantastic job at letting the player experiment and reach an understanding of each ability on their own. Not once does the game tell you what each portal does. It's a classic case of show, not tell. Whenever the player gets their hands on a new portal dimension, often the next area will require them to experiment with such a portal in order to progress, helping the player to get to grips with their new power. It's not until later on in the game that, once you've mastered all the different portals, We have to be backtracking and solving puzzles using multiple different portals. The puzzles themselves are relatively easy to moderate difficulty. Nothing required me to look up how to progress or what to do to solve a puzzle. It comes down to experimenting with the portals available to you. Unbound's puzzles are extremely well designed and satisfying to uncover the correct solution. The platforming, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag. The platforming is somewhat a standard representation of the industry, with things like a double jump, wall climb, and a dash. The double jump and wall climb behave extremely similar to that of Hollow Knight's, but Unbound's dash is faster and shorter in comparison. These abilities aren't all available from the start. They are collected along the way and complement Sully's primary ability to open portals to alternate worlds. The platforming in Unbound requires a combination of both the abilities available to Sully, such as wall climb and his dash, as well as the use of portals. And it's this mix that makes the platforming refreshing and interesting at all times throughout the playthrough. Just as you think the platforming is getting a little stale, the game introduces a new portal or a new ability for you to use in order to progress. Unfortunately, this is where my praise for this game's platforming ends. It could just be my lack of ability when it comes to platforming in 2D games, but I found that some of the abilities and tools were a bit inconsistent, in particular the double jump. If you were on a slope, it would often count sliding as the first jump, meaning that when it came to rotating platforms, whenever you tried to do a pixel perfect jump, it only jumped once. That led to quite a few moments of what I can only describe as infuriating gaming moments. Despite just being a small part of the platforming, it's these rough edges that make the platforming, for me at least, a little less enjoyable. By no means are they frequent occurrences, but when it does happen, it can be extremely upsetting, especially given the fact this game is extremely punishing on some platforming sections, as failure often means beginning the section from the start. The platforming is a mixed bag that creates a challenging yet rewarding experience for the player. Overall, Unbound Worlds Apart is a fantastic game. To say that it lives in the shadow of Hollow Knight is nothing more than a bold yet irrational claim. Unbound's story is simplistic, but creates reason to justify the world and everything within it. Its platforming and puzzles are both difficult and rewarding, using portals and various abilities to keep the gameplay fresh and entertaining throughout the entire playthrough. Unbound Worlds Apart is a great game, worth playing for anyone who's a fan of puzzles and platformers. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, as well as let me know your thoughts on the game in the comment section down below.